If you enjoy stories that touch your heart and inspire you, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss an emotional journey like this one. Sarah Martinez stood in the corner of the hangar, her arms crossed tightly across her chest as she watched the other pilots gather around the large rescue helicopters. Their laughter echoed off the metal walls, bouncing back at her like tiny needles. She could hear snippets of their conversation, though they made no effort to keep their voices down. "Can you believe they actually approved funding for that thing?" one of the senior pilots said, jerking his thumb toward the small red helicopter sitting alone on the far side of the hangar. "Looks like a toy my kid would play with." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she said nothing. She had heard it all before. Ever since she had proposed the idea of a compact rescue helicopter to the Mountain Rescue Committee, a mockery had been constant. The other pilots thought she was wasting everyone's time and money. They believed that bigger was always better, that power and size were what mattered in rescue operations. But Sarah knew something they didn't. She had grown up in these mountains, in a small village nestled between two peaks where the valleys were narrow and the weather could turn deadly in minutes. She had seen people stranded in places where the big helicopters couldn't land, where the rotor wash from massive blades would trigger avalanches, or where the aircraft simply couldn't fit between the rocky walls. Her helicopter was different. It was small, yes, but it was also nimble and efficient. It could land in spaces half the size of what the standard rescue helicopters needed. It used less fuel, which meant it could stay in the air longer. And it was equipped with the latest navigation technology, allowing it to fly in conditions that would ground larger aircraft. "Hey, Sarah," called out Marcus, one of the veteran pilots who had been flying rescue missions for over 15 years. "When are you going to admit that your little science project isn't going to work? We need real helicopters for real rescues." Sarah turned to face him, her dark eyes steady and calm. "Every helicopter has its purpose, Marcus. Mine just happens to be designed for the situations yours can't handle." The other pilots laughed, and Marcus shook his head with a smirk. "Keep dreaming, kid. In 20 years of doing this job, I've never needed anything smaller than what we've got, and I never will." Sarah didn't respond. There was no point in arguing with people who had already made up their minds. Instead, she walked over to her helicopter and began her daily inspection. She ran her hands along the smooth surface, checking every gauge and control with careful precision. This aircraft was her creation, built from her design specifications and her understanding of what mountain rescue really needed. The weeks passed slowly for Sarah. Every day, she arrived at the hangar before sunrise and stayed late into the evening, making sure her helicopter was in perfect condition. She flew practice runs through the mountain passes, memorizing every twist and turn, every dangerous updraft and tricky wind pattern. While the other pilots spent their time drinking coffee and swapping stories, Sarah was in the air, preparing for the moment when someone would need her. That moment came on a cold October morning when the first snow of the season began to fall. Sarah was in the hangar updating her flight logs when the emergency alarm sounded. Everyone rushed to the briefing room, where the rescue coordinator stood in front of a large map of the mountain range. "We have a situation," he said, his voice grave. "A school group went hiking yesterday in the Eastern Valley. They were supposed to return last night, but they never made it back. We have 12 people missing, including 8 children between the ages of 10 and 14, and 4 adult supervisors. The weather is deteriorating rapidly, and we need to find them before the storm gets worse." Right? The pilots immediately began discussing strategy. Marcus stepped forward, confident as always. "My team will take the main valley route. We can cover the most ground with the heavy lifters." Another pilot nodded. "I'll take the southern approach. Between the two of us, we should be able to spot them within a few hours." Sarah studied the map carefully. Her finger traced a line along the eastern valley, and her heart sank as she realized where the hiking group had most likely gone. "They took the narrow pass route," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "What makes you think that?" the coordinator asked. "Because it's the marked trail for beginner hikers," Sarah explained. "It's supposed to be safe and scenic. But if they're still out there, it means they probably took shelter in one of the caves along the canyon wall. That area is too narrow for the standard helicopters. Marcus laughed. Come on, Sarah, you're just trying to make yourself relevant. That canyon is perfectly accessible. I've flown through there dozens of times. In summer, Sarah countered. In clear weather, but right now, with snow falling and visibility dropping, your rotor diameter is too wide. If you try to navigate that canyon in these conditions, you'll clip the walls. The coordinator looked between them, uncertainty crossing his face. Sarah, are you certain about this? I grew up playing in those mountains, she said firmly. I know that canyon better than anyone here. If those kids are in there, my helicopter is the only one that can reach them safely. There was a long silence. Finally, the coordinator nodded. All right. Marcus, you and your team search the main valley as planned. Sarah, you check the narrow pass. But be careful. If conditions get too dangerous, you turn back immediately. Understood? Sarah nodded, already heading for the door. Behind her, she could hear the whispers and doubts of the other pilots, but she didn't care. 12 people were lost in the mountains, and time was running out. Within 15 minutes, Sarah was in the air. The small helicopter lifted smoothly, responding to her touch like an extension of her own body. She flew east, following the valley toward the narrow pass. The snow was falling heavier now, thick white flakes that reduced visibility and made navigation challenging. But Sarah had prepared for this. Her helicopter's advanced instruments cut through the weather, giving her a clear picture of the terrain below as she approached the canyon. She could see why the other pilots avoided it in bad weather. The walls rose steeply on both sides, gray stone faces that seemed to close in as the pass narrowed. A standard rescue helicopter would have perhaps 6 feet of clearance on either side, maybe less. In perfect conditions, an experienced pilot could manage it, but with snow swirling and wind gusting unpredictably, it would be suicide. Sarah's helicopter, however, was built for exactly this scenario. She dropped lower, entering the canyon with smooth precision. The walls passed by on either side, close enough that she could see the individual cracks and ledges in the rock. Her instruments showed 16 feet of clearance, plenty of room to maneuver safely. She flew slowly, scanning the canyon walls for any sign of the missing group. There were several small caves and overhangs where hikers might take shelter. She checked each one methodically, fighting against the growing anxiety in her chest. What if she was wrong? What if they weren't here at all? Then, about 2 miles into the canyon, she saw it. A flash of bright orange, the color of emergency rain ponchos. She brought the helicopter into a hover, activating the searchlight mounted on the front. There, huddled in a shallow cave, about 30 feet up the canyon wall, were the missing hikers. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She activated her radio. Base, this is Sarah. I found them. 12 people, all appear to be alive. Location is Eastern Canyon, approximately 2 miles in from the main valley junction. I'm going to attempt to establish contact. The radio crackled. Copy that, Sarah. What's their condition? Can you extract them? Sarah studied the situation carefully. The cave opening was small, barely large enough for the hikers to crowd into. There was a narrow ledge in front of it, perhaps 8 feet wide. A standard helicopter would never be able to get close enough. Even if it could hover nearby, the rotor wash would be too powerful, potentially blowing the hikers off the ledge or triggering a rockfall. But her helicopter was different. I can reach them, she said into the radio. I'm going to land on the ledge. There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice came through, skeptical as always. Sarah, that's impossible. You can't land on a mountain ledge in these conditions. Watch me, Sarah replied. She began her approach. Landing on the ledge required every bit of skill and training she possessed. The wind pushed against the helicopter, trying to shove it into the canyon wall. The snow made it difficult to judge distances. But Sarah remained calm, making tiny adjustments with the controls. Feeling her way through the air like a dancer finding the perfect position, the helicopter's skids touched down on the ledge with barely a bump. Sarah kept the engine running, but reduced power to idle. She opened the door and stepped out onto the ledge, the cold wind immediately biting through her flight suit. The hikers were staring at her with expressions of disbelief and desperate hope. One of the adult supervisors, a woman in her 30s with frost in her hair, stumbled forward. "Thank God," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "We thought no one would find us. We thought we were going to die up here." Sarah quickly assessed the group. The children were huddled together for warmth, their faces pale and their lips tinged with blue. They had been missing for almost 18 hours in freezing temperatures. Several showed signs of hypothermia, and one boy was cradling his arm against his chest in a way that suggested injury. "Everyone stay calm," Sarah said, projecting confidence and authority. "I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly. No sudden movements, no panic. Understand?" They all nodded, the children's eyes wide with fear and relief. Sarah made quick calculations in her head. Her helicopter was designed to carry 4 people comfortably, 5 in an emergency. She had 12 people to evacuate, which meant multiple trips. But the weather was getting worse by the minute, and some of these kids were already showing dangerous signs of cold exposure. She spoke into her radio. "Base, I need immediate assistance. I can take 4 at a time, which means 3 trips minimum. I need to prioritize the most vulnerable. Is there any way to get another helicopter out here?" Marcus's voice came back. "Sarah, we're at the canyon entrance, but we can't proceed. The visibility is too poor, and the walls are too narrow. You're on your own." Sarah felt a flash of frustration, but pushed it aside. She turned to the adult supervisors. "Which children are in the worst condition?" The woman pointed to 3 kids who were shivering uncontrollably, barely able to stand. "These 3, and Tommy over there with the broken arm? They need help immediately." "All right," Sarah said. "These 4 plus 1 adult supervisor will come with me on the first trip. The rest of you need to stay here and keep each other warm. I'll be back in less than 30 minutes. Can you hold on that long?" The remaining adults nodded, though their faces showed fear. The children who weren't leaving yet looked terrified at the thought of being left behind, but they were too cold and scared to argue. Sarah helped the 4 children into the helicopter, strapping them in securely. The adult supervisor climbed into the front passenger seat. The helicopter shifted slightly under the added weight, but it remained stable on the narrow ledge. "Hold on tight," Sarah told them as she climbed back into the pilot's seat. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." She increased power gradually, feeling the helicopter lift off the ledge. The children gasped as they rose into the air, the canyon wall seeming impossibly close on one side. But Sarah's hands were steady on the controls. She had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times in her mind. The flight back to the base took 12 minutes. As soon as she landed, medical teams rushed forward to help the children out of the helicopter. Sarah didn't even shut down the engine. "I'm going back," she called out to the coordinator. "Have medical teams ready. I'm bringing out 4 more." The second trip was harder. The weather had deteriorated significantly. The snow was now falling so thick that Sarah could barely see 50 feet ahead. The wind had picked up too, gusting through the canyon in unpredictable bursts that made the helicopter shudder and dance. Sarah gripped the controls tighter, her eyes fixed on the instruments. The advanced navigation system was the only thing keeping her on course. She flew by numbers and readings, trusting the technology when her eyes couldn't be trusted. When she reached the ledge again, she found the remaining hikers pressed against the cave wall, trying to shelter from the worsening storm. Their faces lit up when they saw her helicopter emerge from the white curtain of snow. This time she took 4 children, leaving the 3 remaining adults for the final trip. The kids were even colder than the first group, shaking so badly they could barely climb into the helicopter. One little girl started crying, saying she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. "You're going to be okay," Sarah told her gently as she secured the safety harness. "In just a few minutes, you'll be warm and safe. I promise." The return flight was the most challenging flying Sarah had ever done. The wind caught the helicopter and pushed it sideways, threatening to slam them into the canyon wall. Sarah fought against it, making constant corrections, using every trick she had learned in her years of training. The children whimpered in fear, but Sarah kept her voice calm and reassuring. "We're doing great," she said, though her knuckles were white on the controls. "Just a little bit further. You're all so brave." When they finally cleared the canyon and emerged into the open valley, Sarah felt her shoulders relax slightly. The base was just ahead, its lights cutting through the storm like beacons of safety. She brought the helicopter down smoothly, and once again, the medical teams rushed forward. But there was no time to rest. 3 people were still on that ledge, and the storm was getting worse with every passing minute. Sarah checked her fuel gauge. She had enough for one more trip, but it would be close. Very close. "Sarah, you need to wait," the coordinator said, grabbing her arm as she prepared to take off again. "The weather service is saying this storm is going to get much worse in the next hour. It's too dangerous." Sarah looked him in the eye. "Those 3 people trusted me to come back for them. I'm not leaving them out there. You could die out there. And they will definitely die if I don't go," Sarah said firmly. She pulled her arm free and climbed back into the helicopter. As she lifted off for the 3rd time, she heard Marcus's voice over the radio. "Sarah, this is crazy. You've already saved 9 people. Don't throw your life away for 3 more. "That's not how rescue works, Marcus," Sarah replied. "We don't leave anyone behind. Not ever." The flight back into the canyon was like flying through a nightmare. The snow was so thick that Sarah couldn't see anything outside the cockpit windows. She flew entirely by instruments, trusting in the technology and her own instincts. When Sarah finally spotted the ledge through the swirling snow, her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the sound of the engine. The 3 remaining adults were standing at the very edge, waving frantically. They had clearly been terrified that she wouldn't return. Landing on the ledge. This time was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. The wind was howling through the canyon like a living creature. The snow had created a thin layer of ice on the rock surface. The helicopter skidded slightly as it touched down, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. But the skids held. The aircraft remained stable. The 3 adults practically fell into the helicopter in their rush to get aboard. Sarah helped them secure their harnesses, her fingers numb from the cold despite her gloves. One of the men was crying, openly sobbing with relief. "I thought we were dead," he kept saying. "I really thought this was it." "Not today," Sarah said with a small smile. "Now, let's get out of here before this storm decides to get any worse." She lifted off the ledge for the last time, and as the helicopter rose into the air, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. But she couldn't relax yet. She still had to fly back through the canyon and navigate. Through the storm to the base, the return journey felt like it lasted forever. Sarah's arms ached from fighting the controls, and her eyes burned from staring at the instruments. But she kept going, meter by meter, pushing through the storm with determination and skill. When the base finally came into view, Sarah heard cheering over the radio. As she brought the helicopter down for the final landing, she could see dozens of people standing outside despite the storm, watching her arrive. The 3 adults stumbled out of the helicopter and were immediately surrounded by medical personnel and relieved. Family member Sarah shut down the engine and sat in the pilot's seat for a long moment, her hands still gripping the controls. She had done it. All 12 people were safe when she finally climbed out of the helicopter. She found herself facing Marcus and the other pilots, but their expressions had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked like respect and maybe even a little shame. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About your helicopter? About you. That was some of the finest flying I've ever seen." Sarah shook his hand, too tired to feel triumphant. "Different tools for different jobs," she said. "That's all." The coordinator approached with a warm blanket and a cup of hot coffee. "You saved 12 lives today, Sarah, and you proved something important. Sometimes the smallest solution is the right one." Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The other pilots started treating Sarah as an equal, asking her advice and respecting her expertise. The rescue service approved funding for 2 more compact helicopters based on her design. And most importantly, Sarah received letters from the families of the children she had rescued, thanking her for bringing their loved ones home. One letter in particular touched her heart. It was from the little girl who had cried about not feeling her fingers. She had drawn a picture of Sarah's red helicopter with the words, "My hero," written in crayon underneath, Sarah pinned the drawing to the wall of the hangar right next to her helicopter. Let the others laugh if they wanted. She knew the truth. Sometimes the smallest helicopter, the one everyone mocked and dismissed, was the one that made all the difference. And sometimes the quiet pilot who kept training and preparing, while others doubted, was the one who saved the day when it mattered most.